up. It was cloudy, cool. We all wore jackets and whatnot. We all assigned boats, 2 men and a guide per boat, and we headed out in the middle of the lake. And I was standing on the boat in the middle. There was a guy on the end, the aft, one on the bow. Our leader was on the bow. He was catching fish. This guy was catching fish. I never had one nibble the entire time. But as the day wore on, the weather got worse. And so about 11 o'clock, we said, that's it. We better get in before it's bad. We huddled down, pulled our coats over us. The guide, poor guy, he had to kind of see a little bit. It was cold. We were going 35, 40 miles an hour on the water. It was freezing. We were all wet. It was just a miserable end to a fishing trip. Now, when I get to the place and I see all the people there, I see that half of the people are under 50 and half of the people are over 100. I figured that there was a purpose behind all this, and yet I didn't know what it was. Then I met new people there, and it got kind of interesting. Bob Crawford was there. I'd never met Bob before, and that was an interesting introduction. When I also looked around at some young people, I saw this guy, curliest hair I've ever seen in my life, and I said, who in the world is this guy? So I went up and introduced myself. He says, I'm Ben Dye. And I said, great, Ben. We appreciate you coming to our church. You're visiting? He said, no, I've been a member there for about 5 years. Well, I'm beginning to feel pretty inadequate at that point in time because I've been here a long time and been pretty active, and yet I've never seen this guy in my life. So I said, well, then you must go to the 9:30 service. And he said, yes, we do. That's why. So note to self, I said, I've got to get more active, and I've got to get out here and be more public and meet new people that go to our church and are current or future leaders of this church. And so I want to make certain that I did that. So I felt sufficiently embarrassed and in meeting Ben, as well as some other younger men that I had not met before. I will end by saying that ended up being one of the better things I've ever done in my life. I enjoyed that retreat. I especially enjoyed Bill's presentation. Thank you, Bill. I enjoyed meeting Ben and a lot of his younger friends. I enjoyed meeting Bob and being in a small group with Bob, a discussion group with Bob. And I learned and found out some things about Bob I didn't know. And so that's good to do and expand my horizons a little bit. And spending 6 hours in a car with Jim and Mike, that was interesting too. We won't go any farther than that. Ben is speaking this morning because of that presentation he made to the men's retreat. It was interesting, it was fascinating, and something that I had not expected at all. Ben is, of course, you've met Tara and the boys back there. They've got Flint, who's 11, and Atlas, who is 8. I got that right, guys? Okay, good. Tara is a teacher at University School in Tulsa, at TU, and both the boys go to school there as well. Ben is kind of an accomplished person in his own right. He's a mechanical engineer. You've read his outline on our newsletter, but he's a mechanical engineer and has an MBA, and that's two very impressive things to start with, all from the University of Arkansas. He's a business leader with Harrison Energy HVAC here in town is where this unit is, and Ben is responsible for this in Tulsa as well as Oklahoma City. He's been actively involved not only business, not only church, but civically with the Chamber of Commerce as well as the United Way. He and Tara have always been active in their church life, whether it be in Arkansas or whether it be in Oklahoma, and we appreciate that. Then all of a sudden in their life, something happened, and it was different. And that's what we're going to learn today. Ben Dye.
Thank you, Hank. my mother raised me to be an achiever, if you will. It was always what's the next thing, make the right decisions, work hard, try to accomplish something, be in control. And this story is a little bit about, when you think you're in control and you do those right things, and it doesn't turn out exactly the way you think. So, well, let's see if I can. No, we're good. We're good. So this story is a little bit about how I got this scar, and it didn't come from jumping off this waterfall. we had gone to Costa Rica. Thank you to Google Flights. If you've never used that, it's amazing. You type in your dates. You type in Tulsa as your departure airport, and then you can search the whole globe and see where the best deal is, where you might want to go. And so we had some time at the holidays. The kids were out of school particularly early, and so we said, let's go on a trip. And here, lo and behold, it's Liberia, Costa Rica. It's right there. Tara and I spent our honeymoon there. Amazing country, amazing people, wonderful, healthy food. You get exercise. And so we're all excited. And we go, and we're rappelling off of these waterfalls. I think the last one was over 200 feet that we came down. It wasn't fun at all. We went whitewater rafting. Bear with me. I'm not going to make you all bear through a whole family vacation photo trip. But the trip progressed, and we moved to a self-sustaining organic farm. Spent a few days eating farm-to-table meals. Me and the boys, we climbed this mountain, and for some reason I thought, man, I'm out of shape. I tell you what, I can't keep up with these two boys and their athletic prowess. I'm huffing and puffing, I didn't really want this picture, but I had to stop. I had to catch my breath. And, luckily we made it off that mountain. We moved to the coast, out of the rainforest, and they say Oklahomans can't surf. We proved them wrong, boys, didn't we? We did it. And everything's well. And, we had just a trip of a lifetime until it got very serious. So this is my wife, Tara. We moved to we extended our trip. We didn't have plans for Christmas until the weekend following Christmas. And so we ended up deciding to stay in the country a few extra days. And it was just fantastic and very relaxing end to the trip. Couldn't have been more stress-free. And then this is really where the story starts. So in the middle of the night, I wake up. It's, let's call it 2 a.m., and Tara is up walking around in the bedroom. And I said, baby, honey, what are you doing? And she says, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to wake you up, but I've fallen, and I heard something downstairs, and I was going to save the family, as a wife does. And what happened was there was a grasshopper hatch while we were there. And we called them dino grasshoppers. They were this long. And they would fly, and they could see the little light from the microwave through the glass door and just hammer the door. It sounded like someone was throwing a tennis ball at the door. And so anyway, Tara goes to investigate in the middle of the night. And the stairs are wood. She's in her socks, and she slips going around the curve, grabs the post, swings around the stairway. She's strong as an ox. You look at her, and she hammers her hand on the corner of the stairwell, and it punctures her hand. Blood's going everywhere. She's perfectly silent, trying to not wake me or the boys up. And she, is in an incredible amount of pain, gets onto the ground. She's seeing stars, blacking out, gathers herself, cleans up, and had come back upstairs after several minutes. No one was in the house extra. And that's when I woke up. And, as a husband, how should I have responded, right? Are you okay? Can I help you? Can anything? And I said, something's wrong with me. And she said, what? This is my story. This is my story. Like, what? Nothing's wrong with you. And I said, no. I'm serious. Something's wrong with me. The back of my arms is burning. And I'm huffing. And I can't breathe. I can't catch my breath. And so I've got to get downstairs. I've got to get up. And so I go down the stairs, and this thought comes to my head. I said, well, hold on. She tumbled down the stairs, and now I'm losing my breath. Something clearly is wrong with me. We've been poisoned. Somebody's about to come in and kidnap the kids or something. And I'm looking around for a weapon. Get a knife. What am I going to do here? And then I'm like, no, that's not plausible. That's not. But what's wrong with me? I don't know what's wrong with me. And the breathing is getting worse and worse and worse. And I'm hyperventilating. Can't catch my breath. And I'm starting to get a little bit of a heartburn type feeling. And Tara says, well, hey, take some Tums. Let's see if that helps. It did that. It sort of settled down for maybe 60, 90 seconds. And then it just came back in a wave. And these waves just kept coming. And I said, Tara, I think I'm having a heart attack. We need to get somewhere. And so she's on her phone looking for a medical clinic. Well, we're in rural Costa Rica. She says, well, I think I found one that will, you can go to after hours, but it's 30 minutes via gravel road. And you call ahead, and then they send somebody to meet you. And I said, well, wait a minute. If I'm having a heart attack, won't I be dead in 30 minutes? And she goes, well, I don't know. And it was funny now. We sat there and went back and forth. She said, well, we're going to have to get the kids up, because we can't leave them here. We can't communicate. We don't have a way to communicate with them. I don't know if we can get a hold of these people. I don't know if they speak English. And she goes, I think maybe you're having a panic attack. And I said, well, that makes sense. That, you fell down the stairs. Maybe I heard all this happen. And my body went into a fight or flight response. And I just didn't realize it. And so I'm trying to catch my breath. And we sort of go back and forth. And I said, go get the kids. No, don't go get the kids. Get the kid. What are we going to do here? And finally, praise the Lord, it sort of subsided. And this was maybe a half-hour ordeal that seemed like 5. And, the next, couple hours later, we get to sleep. And the next day was pretty traumatic. But I thought, well, I'm super in shape. I've worked out. I lift very heavy weights. I carry my clubs on 18 holes of golf. Heart attack certainly was not on the radar. I don't have a family history of that. So a panic attack it is. And so I spent the day reading about panic attacks and why that might have happened and how to combat that. We make it home. We fished the next day and on the beach and played in the waves and made it home without a further scare. And Tara said, well, you're away from work a long time, and you were probably pretty nervous about going back. You were anxious, and I fell, and maybe all this kind of came together to cause something like that. Well, I get back to work between Christmas and New Year's, and of course, it's like my family there too. I'm happy to see everybody. It's great to catch back up with friends there and hear about the Christmas holidays and all is right with the world. And I go home that night and I go to sleep, and about midnight, here it comes again. My arms start burning. I'm like, oh. Why is this happening? But this time I'm armed with the knowledge of how to deal with a panic attack. And so I go into my 5-second breathing exercises, and I'm, slow breaths out, slow breaths in, and it's all going to be okay. And I'm less scared because I know what happened last time. It ended, it went away, and this time I'm armed with new information. I know exactly what to do, right? Utter confidence. And it did go away. It took maybe, let's call it 20 minutes, 25 minutes this time, but it was pretty scary and a little traumatizing, if you will. And so the next day at work, I thought, something's wrong with my body. It's not working properly. I need to go get it checked out. I don't know if you're like me. My confidence in our modern healthcare system is suspect sometimes. And so I think, well, if I call my general practitioner, it could take me months to solve anything here, to get referrals and get in. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to go get my heart scanned. And so I called our sales leader, Matt Meyer, and I said, Matt, I really need you to send me the link to where you guys all went and got a heart scan a couple years ago. I already remembered them talking about that. And so it was St. John's, and I called St. John's, and they say, well, look, it's a little late to get you in today. Tomorrow is New Year's Day, so we're closed, but except for emergencies, but we could get you in on the 2nd, late morning, let's say. I said, great, I'll see you then. So we go about our lives. I go pick up Tara and the kids. We head to Oklahoma City. We had just opened a new office there, and we did a little tour, did a New Year's Eve game at the Thunder, but something was wrong. I couldn't get excited, which was very unlike me. I could tell that something was not quite right. And that night was tough. The next day was really tough. And then January 2nd, I wake up at 4 a.m. and I just couldn't sleep. And I tossed and turned. So I went ahead and put on my sweats, went up to the gym at St. John's, sat in the parking lot and waited on them to open the door. Finally, about 5:15, a guy comes, unlocks the door. I start trying to do my workout, and I couldn't get through it. I have to set these weights off to the side and catch my breath. And I go on vacation. It's not like I laid on the beach and ate 5,000 calories the whole time. I mean, we were doing all the things, right? We were pretty active, and this shouldn't have happened. So I go home frustrated and without finishing the workout, and I get in the shower, and all of a sudden my arms start burning again for the third time. And I thought, you know what? I can't let this linger any longer. I'm just gonna go up to the imaging floor at the hospital and see if they can get me in. And so I put my sweats back on. It's super early still. I go up there. Sure enough, they're there. And I said, I'm very early for this. Is there any chance you could get me in? They said, sure. Why not? Why not? Come on. And so I wrote the check for $200 or whatever it cost, and the nurse comes to get me, asked me a few questions, and she says, Ben, you need to go to the ER. And I said, whoa, Natalie, I'm not going to the ER. I said, I've got things to do today. I've been out of the country. I've got meetings. I've got people to see, people to call, things to do. I've laid in that ER floor for 3-4 hours. It is not fun, and that is not in my agenda for today. And so she's rolling her eyes, looking at me like, okay, Mr. Know-It-All. So she's, in her head, I've later found out, she's trying to figure out how to convince me to do that. And I didn't really feel like I was being particularly hard-headed. I had done what I thought was the prudent thing, which was to set up these scans. And instead of getting a referral and take until April, let's go find out what's wrong. And so she put me in the CT. looking for calcium. I slid out of that. They did the 12-wire EKG, and she had set me outside, disappeared, and then promptly comes back and looks like she has seen a ghost. And she said something cryptic, and I said, "You can't tell me what you just saw." She said, "No, sir, we're waiting on the doctors to get here. It's January 2nd. It's, And about that time, her partner wheels out a wheelchair, and she said, "Ben, I can't make you not go get in your truck and go to work, but this is the wheelchair that's taking you to the ER. Get in it now." So a normal person would have said, "Oh my goodness, let's go," right? But no. I go sit down. I call Tara in a passive-aggressive way, and I make sure the nurse can hear me. I said, "They're taking me to the ER." And she says, "Well, I was heading to the gym. Let me cancel my class, and I'll come meet you." And I said, "Well, don't do that. I'll be there for 3 or 4 hours. And just come afterwards and meet me in the waiting room." Of course, she didn't. We turn the corner, and there are 6 ladies waiting on me. And it's aspirin in the mouth, IV, blood pressure, meds, all the things, right? The typical triage, all the questions. And the whole rest of that day to me is a big blur. I don't remember a whole lot other than just not knowing a whole lot about what they saw, what they did. I knew I was getting further heart testing. I knew they'd given me an aspirin, but really didn't understand what was happening. We made it to the heart cath, let's say late afternoon, and I'm in commercial air conditioning and have been doing hospital work for many, many years. And so I'm in this lab, and I understand how all this works, what they're doing. They say 45 minutes, we'll get in there with the camera, look around. If we see this blockage that we think might be there, we'll put a balloon, do a stent. You'll be good as new. Just do your thing. And so we go in there. I wake up. My wife is sitting beside me, looking terrified. And she says, "Ben, you were only in there for 12 minutes. And me, being the glass half full kind of guy that I am, was like, "Great. Great. It's so minor that they're probably just going to give us some medicine and we'll be out of here." Well, then, Tara's asking the nurses questions. I'm still a zombie from the narcotics or the anesthesia, and she's asking questions. They won't answer her questions, right? They keep deflecting and deflecting. I wasn't of right mind to even pick up on that. But the cardiologist on duty comes around and says, "Oh, my goodness," and I'm paraphrasing here, but "I'm really not sure how you're still alive. You have so much damage, so much calcified plaque in your arteries, so much blockage. Your only chance of staying alive is for us to cut you open and start doing bypasses." And still, I'm like, "Where's Barrett? He's behind this. You got me. My buddy, he got me. Candid camera, where is it?" I'm like, this can't be real. He's got the wrong clipboard. Not exactly. At that point, a lot of things change, right? And there's a little more to the story that, in the interest of time, I'm gonna sort of browse over. Thank goodness Tara was there advocating for me the whole time, and it was a big trauma for our entire family too. In addition to what I've gone through, which I don't want to overlook, but you have some pretty serious conversations with God through that. And I don't know if any of you read what the Pope Francis wrote in the hospital recently before he passed, but he said, there's a lot more serious conversations and prayers within the hospital walls than there are in a church. And I can attest to that. You know, all of a sudden you're trying to wrestle with things like, are you ready to die? Are you scared to die? Do you know where you're going? How have you lived your life? How have you impacted people? Have you left the right impression, the right legacy? What's going to happen to your kids, to your family, to your wife? Overwhelming heartbreak, right? To have Tara have to go through this this kind of trauma. I can't imagine for my boys. You know, I always thought I would finish raising my kids, right? And all of a sudden, that's all at risk. And you think you're in control, and wait a minute, maybe you're not. A lot happened there in those hours following that conversation with the cardiologist. But, you know, from a faith perspective, a lot happened right. And in the midst of a lot of confusion and miscommunication between the surgeon and the cardiologist, a chaplain comes in. Turns out it was one of my golf buddies from across town that felt the need to call and request one and send them to our room. He shows up and says, I heard you called a chaplain. And Terry and I looked at each other and said, no, we didn't, but get in here. You know, and he prays this perfect prayer for clarity. And shortly thereafter, the cardiologist and the surgeon got on the same page, didn't send us home. You know, it was clear that God had brought us through these steps and got us into the hospital to where there was a chance to be saved. Then, through a few more events, one of my old mentors and partners on a sales team in Northwest Arkansas showed up, Jim Bradford, and he said, I came here to pray for you. And, you know, it's if you knew him, you would say, of course you did. You know, he's that kind of guy. And he showed up, and we held hands, and he said, you know, Lord, I just pray that you would bring peace to this whole situation and relieve the tension, relieve the worry, if you will. I don't exactly remember. I know the theme of that. And wouldn't you know that me being the engineer I am, you know, I want to know every detail about this surgery. I would have watched it on YouTube, you know. I didn't Google it. I didn't YouTube it. Nothing. I went through the next, it's a longer story, but I didn't get into surgery until Monday morning. Not once did I go and dig into this. The surgeon sat down and told me step by step. He's like, have you ever skinned a deer? Yes, I have. Okay, well, that's how we start. And, you know, and here's what we're going to do. And we're going to deionize your heart. We're going to stop it. We're going to deflate your lung. We're going to be pumping blood. You know, he went through it, and it made perfect sense. To me, okay, sounds good. So what are the risks? How do you mitigate those risks? 1, 2, 3. Okay, well, if this happens, we do this. If this happens, we do that. I'm good. I don't know how I was at peace other than divine intervention, because it wasn't natural to be at peace in that moment, right? God clearly had a plan. Before the surgery, we prayed, me and the boys, and Tara, and we prayed that, God, we trust your plan, whatever it is. If it's me being saved, if it's me not being saved, you know what's best for us. And we honestly, genuinely believe that. We honestly believe that. Now, you wake up in the ICU after a massive surgery, and some of you in this room may have been through that before. You know something crazy and unnatural has happened to your body, you know, and it's the movie thing, right, where you can only see this amount of vision, and there's a guy yelling at you, and it's Ben, I'm gonna pull this breathing tube out of your lungs. And I'm like, no, but I probably didn't say a word. You know, and back to sleep. And then, you know, you wake up and your breaths are about that big, and you can just barely get enough in to keep going, and trying to drop your shoulders, and everything is just, you're strapped down, your wrists are held, and you know it's a life or death sort of moment. The pain that happened, and I don't want to dwell on every little event, but you know, there was a night that the pain medicines had gotten out of whack, and it was unlike anything I'd ever felt in my life. To the point that I actually felt an overwhelming sense of guilt for watching any sort of war movie. I felt like, oh my goodness, maybe this is what a soldier could feel like on a battlefield with no pain meds and his body torn up. And I thought, how could I have ever watched that as entertainment? How dare I? It made me sick to my stomach. You know, and there was times where it's like, I can't go any farther. I've pushed and pushed and pushed. And you pray to God that, hey, if your plan is for me to stay alive, you're going to have to pick me up and carry me over the finish line, because I can't do it alone, which is an incredibly humbling feeling. You know, I'm used to being in control, make decisions quick, fast, weigh the risk, weigh the rewards, go, 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 go. And people ask me now, how have you changed, Ben? Well, let me tell you. I can elaborate a little bit there. I don't think my priorities were necessarily out of line, but the weighting of my priorities were certainly out of line. Now, gets to be about 5 o'clock. I want to go home and pick up Flint and go shoot baskets at the gathering place. A lot more than I want to sit there at that desk. It puts everything into perspective really fast to go through staring over the cliff of death like that. You know, you find out, I mean, I feel like I've heard it 100 times, but you find out, you know, what's really important here. And the necessity of your community is unlike anything I'd ever experienced. You know, when they turned the phone back on, for instance, or Tara was updating me on who was checking in, who was calling, the people were racing in from out of town. It was overwhelming. I cried and cried and cried all day in the hospital at some point. And, you know, it was a little bit like getting to witness your own funeral in a way, because people were sharing stories and voicemails and texts and messages with ways that I had impacted them that I had no idea. I had no idea how it helped them through a situation or whatever it may be. I don't think we understand the impact that we have on others always, and the impact that they have on us, which was to go through that was an incredible blessing. You know, the other thing I went through was a forced slowdown. And you guys have heard David talk about, you know, be intentional, spend some time with God every day, right? Well, I'm saddled with this situation where I've got to go sit at home for weeks on end and try to recover. And the last thing I wanted to do was sit around and watch Netflix for 6 or 8 weeks, right? So I made a routine. I would get up, I would go sit down at the breakfast table. Flint, bless his heart, would make my breakfast. You know, Atlas was fetching things. And then I went to work on you know, my faith. And I found it fitting, since I was in St. John's, to start with books that John wrote. And I started reading. Tara gave me a devotional book that she had that she wasn't using. I started doing that every day. After about 5 or 6 days, it hit me that this was meant for women. And I said, "Are you really worried about this?" And she says, "Well, yeah, you don't have to read the rest of that." And I said, No. Maybe it'll give me a better perspective. I think this could be good. This could be good. But I went through the routine and started meditating, started praying, I watched every sunrise over my neighbors' houses, and could, clearly couldn't have been more grateful for that. And as a result of all that, I became more centered and more grounded. I care less about trivial matters. Everything they say, don't sweat the small stuff. I couldn't capture it better. That loss of control really hits you square in the jaw, and all the right decisions that you make, they don't necessarily determine God's plan, because clearly our minds aren't big enough to understand that interwoven plan and how big and complex it can be. At the men's retreat, Bill talked a little bit about our mission, and over the course of my life, I stubbed my toe a lot of times. I did a lot of things that I'm not proud of, and thank goodness there weren't smartphones in my 20s, or my college years, right? And I missed my mission many occasions, I think, without a doubt. I don't ever want to see those highlights, but all the experiences I've had, whether it be leadership opportunities in high school or college or through work, the friends that I've made, the networks that I've built, all those hard times, all those struggles, the whole life flashes before your eyes. And my whole life culminated in this single point and this single event, this forced slowdown. And then God says, "Okay, I got your attention here." He's been waiting and preparing me for decades for this very moment. And here's the fun part. I want to tell you the ripple effect of that. He starts throwing me these little soft tosses to knock out of the park on a 6-year-old field for an adult, right? And he says, "I just need you to tell this story." So, well, easy enough. I lived it. It's pretty fresh, right? And the first thing I got to do was I needed to cancel my gym membership, not cancel, but pause. And so I listened to the podcast of these people that do this program, and I knew they probably weren't believers. And so I wrote a letter explaining what had happened, but I put pieces of my faith journey in that letter. Well, wouldn't you know, they sent that out to their entire network all across the country, unedited. I don't know who it impacted, but I know it impacted somebody. I was asked to kick off our sales summit. A coworker's going to get checked out. People checking on their life, really doing their own self-checkup, right? The nurse that got me to the ER won an award. She's been celebrated a couple of different times and been able to tell her story. Fox News picked up the story, and it sounds like I don't have enough time, but I was worried that they wouldn't tell it in such a way that it needed to be told, with the faith pieces of this interwoven. And to think that God couldn't work that out, I'm embarrassed, because he took a reporter who was 22, 23 years old, fresh out of Oral Roberts. She did the whole story. She filmed it. She edited it. She wrote it. She published it. I could. I don't think we have time. How much time do I have? 15 minutes? Okay. Why don't we come back if if we have time. That was the picture of my heart. I forgot I had that in there, but everything was blocked. Everything was blocked. But this reporter just knocks it out of the park. She leads with God. And what I was saying, I talked for 45 minutes. She put together a 4-minute video. I probably was represented in 45 seconds total of that. But she worked in the faith story. The hospital gets flooded with people coming to do heart scans. The nurse texted Tara just last week and said two more came in. 2 more, mid-40s, in shape, look healthy, had no idea they were in trouble, but they probably were going to die at any minute. The big one was coming. God just keeps on working. Ascension did a story very similar to that. The men's retreat. You know, I'm laying in the hospital bed, and Tara says, hey, the bulletin came out. There's a men's retreat down at Broken Bow. And, you know, I said, when? And I said, well, that's your birthday weekend. Are you sure you want me to go on that? I don't think that's probably. I said, I'm still in the hospital, Tara. I don't know what the next month is going to look like. Are you sure? And she says, yeah, I want you to have something to look forward to. You love to fish. So I sign up. And it's probably not, you know, Hank, it's not something I probably would have done. Probably, you know, there's just too many kids' sports and activities and things to leave for a whole weekend like that. But I did it. I get there. By chance, I sit next to Bill. He's giving his messages, and it's perfectly interweaving through this story. Just perfect, like magic. And then David comes to me, you know, and I wasn't expecting this, and he said, Ben, I really think you ought to tell your story. Most people here don't know what happened to you. You look fine. And I said, well, I'll be happy to tell the story, you know. That's not a deal. This is before the news and all the other things. I was pretty fresh off of being able to travel. But I was able to, I prayed to God that, you know, I don't know all the folks here, but please help me say the words that will impact somebody in this room, just one person. You know, help my story help them. And I told Tara, I got up to tell that story, and I don't think I've ever had an audience hanging on to every word like that, ever in my life. It was just, I don't even know how to describe it, but Bill had given me all the pieces to weave. Bill and David together had given me all the pieces to weave this health story into something that would be impactful, and all I had to do was say it. And for hours after I told that story, men came up to me sharing stories with me about things they were going through, things they had been through, things they were struggling with. And this happened until I'm pretty sure I was the last person to go to bed. And then the whole next morning, it was just such a powerful weekend to see God's work. You know, not a week goes by that someone doesn't come up to me. I mean, on Easter Sunday, I had a gentleman come up to me and say, "Hey, I went and got a scan, and sure enough, I've got calcium in my coronaries. It's not near as bad as yours, but at least now I know, and I can watch, and hopefully I can be here for my family." You know, God put this mission right in front of me with all the tools I needed. All the tools I needed to carry out His plan. You know, and I now have this faith and health testimony, and my prayer for all of you and everybody that I talk with is really simple, is that, you know, the trials and the struggles that we all go through, they build depth of character. They build us, they change us, they turn us into who we are. And I pray that we all can be centered and grounded enough to recognize that in the moment and not feel sorry for ourselves, but say, you know what, this is a great thing to happen to me. This is going to help somebody and bring glory to the kingdom of God in some way that I can't understand. And I got a couple of verses here that I've since read, you know, since this all happened. And this is Paul saying, you know, the Lord said to him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I'm content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I'm weak, then I'm strong." You know, the notes in my MacArthur Study Bible say, you know, Paul delighted in that pain because of what it meant for how God was using him as a pass-through to tell a story, to do his work. And I think if we could all be more like that, we would all be more powerful. And that's our story. Do we have... Okay. Any questions that came up while I went through that? Well, if not, would you guys want to see the Fox story that they put out? Okay. We have to watch the ad, sorry.
Severe weather team to keep you and your family safe.
It was terrifying, you know. I had to ask God to carry me across the finish line if he wanted to keep me alive.
New this morning, a healthy, active Tulsa man had an unexpected experience with heart disease. I learned how quick action from a nurse saved his life.
I was actually in probably the best shape I've been since maybe high school football 25 years ago.
For Ben Dye, heart disease was not on his radar. He was on vacation with his wife and sons, fishing, hiking, and surfing.
I mean, I got tired like anybody else would, but you know, no real signs of heart disease that were dead giveaways.
One night, he woke up with his arm burning and shortness of breath. After 20 minutes, the pain subsided, so they chalked it up to a panic attack and finished their vacation. But when they got home, Ben felt the burning in his arm again.
I had this heavy feeling on my chest. Something was not quite right.
Just to rule out any heart problems, Ben scheduled an exam for a couple days later. But when his arm started burning a third time, he decided to just go in early.
That's when I met my guardian angel. And so a nurse comes to meet me and asks me some questions. And she says, "Ben, you need to go to the ER."
Ben told the nurse, Natalie, he didn't want to go to the emergency room, and she ran CT and EKG scans.
She comes back and looks like she has seen a ghost.
I saw that his heart was actually currently having some injury happening.
Natalie told me she knew Ben needed immediate care, and she couldn't let him walk away.
And I was like, yeah, if you were my family, I would ask my family to go to the ER.
She convinced Ben to go to the emergency room and called ahead so they would be ready for him.
Trying to keep him calm. We talked about family, and that he had just came back from a family trip. He shared with me the ages of his kids, which is very close to my our youngest son, and so it really hit home.
Once he got there, Ben went through a small procedure to check if there was any blockage around his heart.
The cardiologist that was on duty that night comes around the corner and says, you know, Mr. Dye, and I don't remember exactly how he said this, but roughly it was, wow, not sure how you're still alive, but you have so much blockage, so much damage, that, you know, we just had to back out carefully, you know, don't want to disturb anything, but we've got to crack your chest open and start doing bypasses as quickly as possible if you want to stay alive.
Oh, from a danger perspective, it was significant. You know, on a scale of 1 to 10, a 10.
Dr. Richard Kassiri is a cardiologist with Ascension St. John. He explained Natalie's quick action in getting Ben to the emergency room might have saved his life.
It's not normal necessarily for a person involved in a procedure to then actually act on the results of that procedure and care about the patient so much that they take all of this into their own hands. So if she had just kind of done her job and let Ben move on to his part of his day or whatever it might be, theoretically he was in the throes of injuring his heart muscle, i.e. a heart attack. And so bad things would have probably progressed.
Ben went through open heart surgery a few days later. He told me the experience was terrifying, but he's grateful he's alive.
I really wanted to finish raising my boys who are 8 and 11, and I prayed to God that if that was part of his plan, I really, really wanted to do that.
Ben is now healthy and recovering. He told me he was even able to caddy for his son's golf tournament over the weekend and hopes his story encourages you to get your heart checked out. So if you want to set up a heart scan, we have information on how to do that in this story on fox23.com.
Well, that's it. And I did get great news this week. The part of my heart had gone into a hibernative state that, you know, what the surgeon said was that I had a spaghetti network of volunteer arteries that had sprung out of places that had some blood flow and had come back, wired back into the heart, basically to keep that tissue alive, even though it wasn't pumping. And anyhow, through the rehab and the surgery, I found out this week that all has come back to life. So hopefully, good as new. So thank you, Hank, for the opportunity